All right, everyone. Welcome into episode 7 of Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports. The sports podcast discussing both American and Brazilian sports and the similarities and differences between them. I'm Nicholas Hill, live here from Chattanooga, Tennessee of the United States of America. And joining me from Americana, Sao Paulo, Brazil is my friend Gustavo Tomazeli. Gus, how are you on this Tuesday evening, December 7th?
Doing good, doing good. A little hot in here. Oh my god, it's like I forgot how hot Christmas time in Brazil can be, but I'm good, ready to talk
Yeah, because it is
sport.
summertime down there. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's summertime here, so it
Yeah.
feels weird. And we're gonna talk definitely on our holiday show next week. But doing good, doing good. A little sad that the season's almost over here, so not much games happening. But
Right.
we have a lot to talk about tonight.
Yeah, I do want to start off this episode just by kind of dedicating this episode to those American soldiers who died 80 years ago today at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Today is the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese on American soil, and obviously that launched American involvement into World War II, one of the most significant events in American history, period, especially within the past century. So just obviously thinking of those people and anyone who's potentially still alive today that was affected. Of course, I can imagine there's some really, really elderly people who may have lost parents in that. If you're in your 80s and 90s, probably don't have a lot of those people left with us, unfortunately. But it's still very recent history. I mean, there's still people alive today who went through that, and it's certainly history that we should never forget around the world, because obviously that has massively shaped the world that we live in today. But obviously, kind of moving back over into our opening topic here, we're going to discuss some bribery and gambling in sports, because certainly this is a topic that it's just a problem with sports everywhere, right? It's like there's always going to be dark money that affects sports. And I know there's a specific thing that you wanted to bring up, Gus, that kind of prompted you to suggest this topic for us to discuss today.
Yeah, because when it comes always this time of the year, when there's the last week of a regular season of Brazilian championship, and teams are fighting for either to not be relegated or for the spots into the South American competition, especially Libertadores, the conversation about the white bag always come up. What is the white bag? I try to give an example in the NFL. So let's say the Titans and the Colts are fighting for the division title. Let's say the Titans play the Jaguars and the Colts play the Patriots. So maybe the Patriots will be fighting for another spot, but the Jaguars are not playing for anything. They're already eliminated. So then, the Colts will be inclined to give a little financial incentive to maybe the Jaguars players, be like, hey, if you guys play harder and win this game, you guys get a bonus for us. And a lot of people don't like it. I don't think it's a problem because it's an incentive to win. It's just you kind of give something else for the players to get their objective because they're already eliminated for the season. So that's what happened in Brazil, because a big team, Grêmio, which I discussed last week, they're fighting for relegation. They're still alive, but they need two teams to lose and the Grêmio to win in order for them to not be relegated. But Juventude and Bahia, both of those teams are playing for other two teams that are already they already finished their season. They already got their spots in Libertadores. They're playing for nothing. So Grêmio's management front office said they're going to send money. They're going to send money for those two teams for an incentive to win. So that's the thing. Like, I never saw something like that brought up in America. This kind of and sometimes it happens in the NBA, in the NFL, in the Major League Baseball. You're fighting for a spot in the playoff, and your other team, you're playing for a team that plays for nothing.
Right, and then this is I think of an example like in soccer, and this perhaps is the opposite effect. But I believe it was 1982, West Germany and Austria, and how they kind of mutually agreed to do nothing in the game to assure that both teams would advance. Because I believe West Germany had to score, so they scored.
Yeah, they scored 1-0. West Germany only had to win 1-0, and both would advance.
Yeah, so they just did that, and they both advanced, and that's the reason why in the World Cup, all group games take place at the same time now. So you can't game the system like that.
Yeah, in 1978, something kind of like this happened. Brazil played, I believe, oh my God, I forgot who they played, but they play. I'm gonna go back. 1978. I know Brazil won their game, and Argentina had to win by like 6-0 in order to advance into the final round of the World Cup, and they surprise, surprise, got the win. I know they were hosting, but it was very suspicious circumstances.
Right, and I mean that's the type of stuff that has been confirmed, but how much has not been confirmed that has happened? There's plenty of scenarios where you know you could pay someone to throw a game, or really try to find a way to manipulate a result to end up in your favor.
But
And
my point is, like, have you ever saw any situation where an NFL team offer money to an eliminated team to help beat a team they needed to be beaten in order for them to advance?
yeah, I can't really recall a situation like this um, in a, in American sporting history, because the necessary, I guess, elements for something like this to happen seem um, almost like very specific. Like, I guess, for example, I could see a scenario where like you have an NFL team that's number one seed, they've secured everything, um, and they're playing a team who needs to get in. And if they win, they're in. And I could see maybe that team be like, "Hey, will you rest off your stars today so we can win?" And if they decide to oblige, that would technically be colluding to help them get in. I mean, this type of thing happens a lot in fantasy football, where you'll see friends do backdoor deals to do what's basically called colluding, which is frowned upon, but it has happened.
But for example, now I remember last season. Do you maybe think the Texans players got a lot of money incentive for that game against the Titans, because the Texans were eliminated? They were 4-11, they were out, and the Titans were 11-4, and also the Colts were 11-4.
I mean, if they were white bagging, then they wouldn't have made the game competitive.
But they
I mean,
remember the Texans hold the Titans up until a late field goal.
yeah, but I mean, they were going back and forth. The Titans scored 41 points. I mean, the Texans scored 38. Like, Deshaun Watson played an amazing game, and and plus that's a rivalry game, and that's the thing with the NFL now. Every single last week is a division rivalry game, so it's going to be really hard for us, I think, to find many division rivals willing to help other division rivals.
That's a good point. I mean, but I mean, that's fair. That's one of the things I'm most mad about the Brazilian Confederation, because they put like division like rivals playing on the last week. So there's kind of like suspicion, or they had something to play for, but they got rid of that. I was very disappointed because I feel it worked. I think rivals should play in the last week of regular season to kind of put pressure on that. That's a good point you brought it up. Like the NFL kind of, maybe this rivalry, division rival situation, like you don't want your rival to advance.
Right. And it's definitely situations like that, where you're going to be fighting your rival, no matter what you have or have not to lose. I think about the Lions this weekend, for example. Like, why are they still fighting right now? They're 0-9-1. There's really no point for them to show up the rest of the season. They're not making the playoffs, but they're still showing up. They're finding ways to be in games to win. They finally beat the Vikings, who really needed to beat them to remain in a playoff spot. But they lost to a team that they really shouldn't have. I think with the way American sports, because you think about it, there's no such thing as score differential in NFL, in NBA, in MLB, NHL. Because I think that's another aspect that kind of makes this scenario more plausible in soccer, is you have goal differential. most of the time. And I think that opens up the possibilities for score manipulations, like we saw in that West Germany Austria game.
I think, yeah. I mean, for like example, this Thursday night situation, the last week of Brazilian championship regular season, there's not going to be much goal differential. It's simple. Grêmio just need Juventude and Bahia to both lose their games. Doesn't matter if it's 1-0 or 5-0. They just need Corinthians and Fortaleza to win those games, which is hard because if it was a tie, maybe I would think that's why they really need to throw out the white bag situation. And both, I mean, Juventude plays at home and Bahia plays on the road, so that's the scenario. But still, I don't think it's morally condemned. If I was a front office situation, I would do that because getting relegated costs you a lot of money. Can with especially TV deals, sponsorships. Like I think the NFL should think like that too, or NFL and NBA or MLB. Like if you give some money to incentive for another team to win in order for you to advance, you can get that money back on sponsorships, tickets, TV deal. You're not bribing for them to lose. You're just giving an incentive for a team to win.
Right. I mean, there's always incentives to win. Obviously, winning drives a fan interest, so more people show up to your games, and obviously, playing more games gets you more revenue, and drives up fan excitement, and just drives up TV revenue and everything else. Like in college football bowl games, you may get way more money for going to the playoffs or going to a New Year's Six game than going to the Gasparilla Bowl. So there's always incentives to winning. There's always massive consequences to losing, and I will say for teams in that situation, you had a whole season to avoid being in that situation. You could have won more games earlier in the season to where you don't have to worry about relegation. So whatever happens in the last week, at the end of the day, you only have yourself to blame for putting yourself in a situation where you might get relegated. So teams may
That's a good point.
So teams may cry about, oh, it seemed like this team was throwing this game to relegate us. Well, you should have never been in a spot to be relegated in the first place. And I mean, it's tough, but sometimes you make your bed and you have to sleep in it. And it just sounds like one of those cases where they are refusing to sleep in the bed.
No, I agree. Because, for example, Grêmio, he practically all throughout the regular season stay in the relegation zone. Fans already thought they were relegated. I mean, they won 3 out of their last 5 games, so they mathematically still have a chance to avoid relegation. But I mean, that's a good point. Like, it's not gonna be the Juventude or Bahia result they're gonna relegate Grêmio. Is Grêmio own misfortune and own problems on the field and only be able to win 11 games out of 37 matches. But in desperation times, if you're not doing anything illegal, because they're not paying Juventude and Bahia to lose. They're paying the other teams who are not fighting for anything in the championship anymore. They already, got they already got their objective. They already went to Libertadores. They already done with their season. So they need to like, hey, can you help us? Because if you win, it would have really helped us. So and money talks.
Right. I was thinking about a scenario where this could have happened. I think about like 2016 with the Vols. The last time the Vols had a great shot winning the SEC East, they beat Florida, they beat Georgia. Theoretically, you should win the East when you do those things, but they lost to South Carolina, put themselves in a spot where they needed Florida to lose to LSU, and LSU fails to win at the last minute. Could Tennessee try to talk LSU into winning that game? I mean, you can do whatever you want, but you can't put yourself in a position where you need another team to win, because then your luck is out of your control. It's just, I mean, that's pretty much going to be my main take on this situation, is you can't put yourself in a position where everyone else determines your fate. And if you're in a position where, doing something advantageous like that, which may not be the most ethical thing in the world, is going to protect your, organization in the long term, then you got to do what you got to do. It is a club world, it's a team world, it's a man world. And, if you're playing a 40-game season and you need to do something to protect yourself in the last game, then by all means, I think you should be able to do it. Now, there are consequences to doing that. Obviously, if you decide to sit around and do nothing for an entire game and just park the bus, then your fans aren't going to be happy with that because they want to be entertained, first and foremost. Anytime I want to go to a game, like, for example, like I was watching the Patriots last night, and if I show up to a game and a quarterback only threw 3 times, I would leave kind of upset because I'm just like, I didn't show up for a game that looks like the 1950s. But at the same time, I understand why Bill Belichick decided to run the ball the entire game, because there were 50-mile-an-hour winds and he didn't trust Mac Jones' arm. So you could call that sandbag in terms of the Patriots were scared to run a modern offense. But really, they were just playing with the cards that were handed to them and trying to make the best out of the situation to get the best result. And I understand it's not necessarily cheating, but that is kind of bending the rules, because there's really nothing in the rule book that says you can't just about just standing there in a park the bus motion for 90 minutes and deciding to play for a draw instead of playing to win. I mean, there's nothing in the rule book against doing that.
And another scenario I want to throw at you. I'm bringing a lot of scenarios because end of the season Brazil is always crazy. So I don't think it's gonna happen this year, but a lot of times. So you have, like, example, Grêmio's big rival Internacional. If they had to play, for example, Bahia, which is fighting for relegation with Grêmio, Internacional fans would beg the team to lose, to like, hey, please lose this game. If you win, we will beat you. We will get mad at you, because the rivalry is so intense. They'd rather see their team win. I mean, of course, if they're not playing for anything in the tournament, but even sometimes they would be like, oh my God, we don't know. Do we want to go to Libertadores, or do we want to see our main rival get relegated? But if they're not playing for anything anymore, of course, they're going to be a big pressure for them to be like, hey, just lose this one. Hey, please. Like, I know sometimes like you don't see that in American scenario, but in Brazil it's so common.
Yeah, that just is a really interesting point. I'm trying to think of what's where, like MLB, there's just so many games that I doubt you'd ever see a scenario like that there.
I know what would happen if in the last game was Yankees and Rays, Boston and
Like Toronto.
Toronto. If Toronto wins, then the Yankees were eliminated. So, and the Boston Red Sox are already eliminated. The game is at Fenway Park. What do the Boston Red Sox fans would think?
So, like, basically in that scenario, if like Boston goes, all right, we're just going to throw the ball right down the middle and we're going to purposely miss everything just so the Yankees lose.
Or yeah, because sometimes and because I know the pressure comes out of more the fans. Probably the organization itself. They're not gonna purposely be like, hey, throw like, softballs or don't care. But the fans, of course, the Red Sox fans, they were like, we're already eliminated. We don't see the Yankees going to the playoffs. So they're gonna be.
At the same time, the Red Sox fans paid money to see their team compete to their full ability. Like, I'm just thinking about this. Like, so if Tennessee and Vanderbilt play, and for some reason, Vanderbilt winning, Vanderbilt had a chance to win the SEC East over Georgia for some reason, and we could screw over Georgia by losing to Vanderbilt. I don't want to do that. I would rather my team knock Vanderbilt out of the SEC title game and win, and help Georgia, a team that I dislike way more, or Florida. Like, if Vanderbilt could replace Florida, which I don't think we would ever see that scenario. But I want my team to win every game they play. I personally would not want that. Now, there may be some vengeful people who'd be like, we could screw over Florida. We should do that. But personally, I think that's a terrible mindset to have as a sports fan. And
you're gonna hate me for that, but you're gonna hate me for that. But this is not gonna happen this season, but if for some reason Sao Paulo, one of my main rivals, were fighting for relegation, and Corinthians would play a team that were fighting for relegation too, I would kind of root against Corinthians in that scenario, because I saw friends of mine rooting against their own team, Palmeiras, because if Palmeiras won, Corinthians will win the title. I saw that with my own two eyes. It was, I
Yeah.
remember, it was like 2010. So,
I mean, I
and
can understand the logic, but then that just says you're a bigger hater of your rival than a bigger fan of your own team. And that's just not the way I operate. Like, I am a bigger fan of my team than I am hater. Now, you could operate as a bigger hater of your rival, and that's fine. I mean, there's no rule on how to be a sports fan. But to me, that just doesn't seem as fun, you know? Because I mean, it is fun to root against. Like, it was fun to watch Georgia blow it the other day, but it's at the same time. Ultimately, I'd rather Tennessee be taking the beating in the SEC title game because that means Tennessee wins the SEC East.
but I think Tennessee fans will be inclined if some god crazy scenario, Tennessee loses to Vanderbilt, they would have knocked out of Georgia. No, they would not knock out of Florida. I think some Vol fans would be if like Tennessee's already like 6-6 or 7-5, and they're already in the bowl game. But if they lose to Vandy, Florida is not going to win the SEC East. I mean, I would bet a lot of Tennessee fans would not they would cheer against the Vols, but they would not be upset if the Vols lose.
Like, I'm trying to think about, and there's some rivalries where I just don't think you'd ever see this, like Alabama Auburn. I don't think there's any scenario where like Auburn wants to lose to Bama or Bama wants to lose to Auburn.
No. I think this would not happen because they play each other at the end of the regular season. But if because
I
of
mean,
some
Tennessee and
crazy
Vanderbilt also play each other at the end of the season, so that's why I'm bringing up that scenario.
no, just trying to give some sort of comparison because but I think if Alabama and Auburn, let's say they would not play each other at the end of regular season. Let's say the Iron Bowl is a week early, and then Auburn wins Alabama, and Alabama is 11-1, and Auburn, let's say, playing 12-0 LSU. If Auburn loses, then the Alabama would not go to the SEC West. Did not win the SEC West, and and then they definitely knock out of Georgia, Alabama out of the playoff. What would Auburn fans would think?
Well, they also are rivals with LSU too, so I think they also want to beat LSU
Uh,
in that scenario. So I don't know. I just think that's a really hard concept. Maybe like NBA, but like there's so many games too where I think that scenario would be very rare. Um, as an NFL, everyone's playing division rivals. So I think there's always something to lose, I think, in those other sports. And also, too, you got to think about as well in a bowl game scenario. Like if the Vols are 6-5, you can get a better bowl game at 7-5 than 6-6. Or like if you're Auburn at like 9-2, and you can
yeah,
in 10-2
that's a
now.
good point. They're playing
There's a
for
lot of
something.
money. I mean, you're throwing away money.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're just trying to make comparison because that's one of the biggest folks, like kind of biggest, kind of fan-driven situations when it comes to this time of the year, and that's how like the difference between American and Brazilian culture. I think the hater of the rival is bigger in Brazil than in America.
Right. I mean, it's very much more territorial. Now, I mean, it's territorial here, but it's very territorial in Brazil, at least from the outside.
Oh yeah, it's a big territorial, revengeful. Like for example, Corinthians were relegated in 2007 when they tied to Grêmio. So this weekend, Corinthians played Grêmio, and they brought coffins, they brought chants, and because they wanted to kind of revenge that relegation, they ended up tying. So Grêmio did not get relegated in that game. But there's very territorial and revengeful, and fans care more about their rival losing sometimes than their own team winning. That's so crazy.
And I will say this: I think a lot of this happens off the field. You know, where like,
Yeah,
for example, like Philip Fulmer, like infamously turned an album into NCAA and stuff like that. Um, so I do think stuff like that can happen off the field, but in terms of directly affecting results on the field, I think that's really hard to pull off in a meaningful way.
yeah. And speaking of off the field and money and even dirt money sport, like refereeing, it's such like bribery in referee has always been hard in sports. Like in Brazil, the biggest scandal of all was the 2005 Brazilian Championship, where two referees were caught in phone calls with booking. What is it like? Booker. I always forgot the term. Like
Bookies, bookies.
bookies with bookies to kind of set up games for those bookies, and then the games they were allegedly setting up were disregarded. They were the results were disregarded, and they had to play it again. And then my team Corinthians got benefited because two of those games Corinthians lost, and then they play again. Corinthians tie one and got win the other. But it was a very still people talk about that 16 years later about how those two referees kind of you know kind of put a big stain on the Brazilian soccer reputation. How that Corinthians championship, even fans kind of don't celebrate it as much because it was so corrupt, and they were so scandalous. People didn't celebrate. So now with betting, it's not even the referees anymore. It's even the young talents and stuff. But in America, I bet still people, I guess, think about the NBA refereeing scandal.
Oh, right, right. When you think about guys like Tim Donaghy, who openly admitted to betting on games, and basically what would happen is, at least in his own words, is that he himself wouldn't call a game differently based on how he betted, but basically when he would listen in on the NBA, because the NBA basically, when they talk to their referees or say, all right, I want you to focus on this thing, or I want you to focus on this thing. Like, for example, if LeBron James is aggressively driving to the hole, the NBA could say, hey, watch for people, watch for opposing players to aggressively hack LeBron. And that ultimately gives him way more free throws because they're focusing on something. So basically, Donaghy would take this inside knowledge and go and bet on games, which obviously is a big no-no, should never happen. I think about a game like the 2002 Lakers in Sacramento Kings Game 6, which was clearly officiated in the favor of the Lakers and basically helped knock out the Kings, which a lot of people think they did because Sacramento is one of the smallest markets. And Sacramento Kings overall just are not a very good franchise. They haven't made the playoffs in over 15 years. And it's a tough situation. But now it's really muddy because sports gambling is starting to become legal in many, many states. It's legal here in Tennessee. So, obviously referees and stuff, they can't bet on games, at least not legally. But, how do we know they're not? I mean, it seems like, you could bet through your wife or bet through a family member or, something like that.
Or like, let's say this 2005 example, how do you think bookies kind of approach the officials?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, they have to. Like, they got to gain insider knowledge somehow. And I feel like if we knew that Tim Donaghy was openly doing this stuff, then he's not the only one. There's no way he's the only one. So, this stuff happens all the time, which is probably a cynical view, but it's probably a more realistic view because that's a lot of money on the line.
Oh, yeah.
Bookies. And you got to think, how half the time, how are they so accurate? How could they say, oh, this is a 12-point line? And half the time the game is really close to a 12-point outcome. There has to be at least some inside knowledge there to doing those lines.
And go even more than referees. Like in Brazil, there's a lot of betting that happens in the lower divisions. Let's say the fourth division in the state of Sao Paulo tournament that I cover, the second and third or even fourth division in state championships that don't get enough, don't get practically any media, don't get any viewership, only a handful of smaller radio stations and website broadcasts. So bookies go to those players and be like, hey, we're going to bet there's going to be 4 corner kicks. Can you get that for us? And, sometimes they do. Like, they just kick the ball off the field. They just find a way to get those results. Sometimes even go bold, be like, hey, can you score 3 let the other team score 3 goals, and then you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that very is very possible. And with all the specialized betting that goes on now, like this player is going to have X amount of points. Like, okay, what's stopping a referee from sending that player to the line a lot, a free throw line, to get those points, like a James Harden or a Trey Young or someone like that. So I do think there's a lot of crookedness. When we think about a guy like Pete Rose historically, who was betting on his own games and throwing certain games. The reason why he's not in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He probably never will be, at least not while he's alive. So I mean, that stuff happens more than you like to think, and you got to think about the trickle down effects. Obviously you can bet on college football. Is there going to be a day that we can bet on high school football? I know, obviously, we just had our state championship
G
here in
League. I compare a lot to the G League because there's no coverage on D League. Let's be real, Nick.
Right.
There's only a handful of people that watch G League games. It's hard to find to watch, but I guess you can still like place bets on it. So I guess it's easier to manipulate those games, like the scenario that I brought to Brazil. The lower the interest of fans and media, the more chances of the situations to happen, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. And I bet this happens a lot too in low level college basketball, because you can bet on any college basketball game, but outside of the Dukes and the Tennessees and all the big time programs, who's watching like Wofford and Georgia Southern, or Lehigh and Bucknell, or some teams like that, that don't have massive fan bases or massive alumni bases. And you can definitely. So I found the college basketball lines to be typically the most inaccurate. So there has to be, maybe not necessarily rigging, but just you have much fewer insiders. So if something's happening, it's probably a lot lower chance of it being caught.
Yeah, like for example, let's say champion Christian College and Houston Baptist play with no TV at 10 p.m. Like, I don't want to say anything about those two, but I guess the scenario that an example of what you said.
Right. Right. Just teams that don't have that much fan interest. I would like to see just the money differentials between those two, and let's say a Duke North Carolina, a game that's going to get a ton of bets because a lot of people watch that game.
Yeah, and of course, the integrity of the sport is important, and it's up to the player and to the referees and to the management to keep that integrity. But of course, when you're in a situation financially, that's why bookies try to approach, at least in Brazil, those lower tier teams, because sometimes they don't have a salary. Their team, don't have any way to pay their regular salary. Maybe they need the money right away for feed their family. And then you come somebody say, "Hey, I'll give you this amount of money if you do this for me."
Right. Yeah. I mean, as I've been saying, anything wouldn't shock me anymore when it comes to sports and gambling and everything else. And this is not a condemnation of gambling. Like I do gamble myself.
No,
I think it should be legal everywhere. But clearly, you do have to be concerned with what certain things could happen as a result of it, and clearly it's ultimately up to every single sports league and entity and like conference to prevent this sort of thing. So hopefully all those people have good departments that can detect stuff like this when it happens. But I imagine from time to time you are going to see stuff like this happen.
Yeah, like for example, come January, the championship in Brazil that drives betting a lot higher is it's called Little Cup. It's like one of the largest under 20 soccer tournaments I think in the world. It's like more than 100 teams playing for a month in like in a World Cup kind of style. Teams, groups of four, and there's going to be games that people are not going to care and watch. Recently, I think the conference kind of set up like a internet way to watch all the games, but there's teams coming from like states that don't have enough financial support, so it's always hard. The temptation is always there, but when it comes to it, if hopefully the integrity of the sport can be kept, because I think the more scandals that happen, the less people will be interested in.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely destroys public trust and confidence because they want to trust what they're seeing is a genuine outcome of a sport.
And also in terms of bribery, one of the things that happen a lot more in America than in Brazil. Brazil happens a little bit is the bribery on the young level because I mean in America I'll say is the bribery that happens in college football, college basketball. You know, you had the example, the alleged McDonald's bags happen in Tennessee football, or the scandal at Ole Miss or Mississippi State. You know, players that were had a financial compensation, on kickbacks and bribery because they were not allowed to be paid because of NCAA rules, or even in Brazil where players change teams from one team to the other because the agent gave money behind the scenes. But I think that's a bigger deal in America.
Oh, absolutely. Um, it's just certainly, I think all these situations are going to be very different. And as I said previously, it's all going to be about the individual um, leagues and how they respond to those situations.
Yeah, and I think NIL definitely changed the fact, and but it's just for me, people cannot be also naive to think that bribery in sports will never happen.
Oh,
There,
absolutely.
where
But
there's
at least
money,
now, we can openly pay college football players. So hopefully that will diminish the school's ability to pay players to an extent, just because we now know openly they're getting paid. And I think at some point you're going to see a mandated pay structure. And then hopefully recruits go back to having to choose schools based on other factors besides who's paying me.
yeah, yeah. That's one day I hope so too. Like in Brazil as well. I just hope one day that you know players won't have to be pressured to sign with teams just because their agents give incentives and they have to leave their hometowns, their home teams to go somewhere else. But I know it's naive because it's not, up to my line. Any person has a need, especially financially, to support their family, to support their environment, and sometimes a best financial deal is not what fans or what the home crowd wants.
Yeah, it's just tough decisions, and we all have tough decisions to make in life, and these players are no exception. And having to choose between, for example, like if I were a 5-star athlete, it'd be insane for me to stay home and play for the Chicago Mox. But I just know the NIL deals I could get here do not rival what I would get in Knoxville with the Vols, or what I could get in Tuscaloosa with the Tide, or any other major program. So, um, I guess bribery. It's kind of like institutionalized bribery. That's completely legal because some programs are always going to get the talent, and some are never going to get the talent, all because of what's already been pre-established. But is that really bribery? Because I don't think it is. It is a consequential result of a century of football results.
Yeah, it's like here in Brazil too. Like, of course, smaller teams are complaining, "Oh, we lose a young talent of 15 or 16 or 17 uh, to the bigger teams." But like, of course, those players wanted to play for the top 12 teams in the country because that's their dream. That's where they're gonna get more views. That's where they're gonna get more appreciation, even sponsorships. So they're not, of course, small market teams always want their home players to stay and for loyalty, but at the end of the day those players also need to think about their you know short or even long term financial situation.
Yeah, because it's all about the balancing the individual need with your community need. And I can imagine in Brazil, where you have a lot of those community soccer teams, if you have a generational talent that grows up in Americana, for example, you would love for them to stay and play for Rio Branco, but Rio Branco, they can't bring the same potential revenue that them going overseas and playing for like Real Madrid can bring.
Yeah, or even Corinthians or Sao Paulo, Palmeiras here in the state. They're in the first division. They're the rich teams. We can't compete to that anymore. Like,
Exactly. And I don't know if there's the incentive to change that. It's like how even within the SEC, Missouri, they're not going to have the same resources that Alabama has because of where they are.
yeah,
They don't have as many people. and they don't have the same backing. So it's certainly a tough situation in terms of making things more fair, because that's ultimately what sports leagues I think are trying to do, is to level the playing field, but it's not always possible.
And of course, and I'll finish up with that, and then we move on. The modernization of the sport always will favor the most established team. Like, last 10 years in college football, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State got the best recruits because they were able to establish themselves as a big power, teams in the country. Like in Brazil, especially after the Pelé law, where players had more say on their careers, they got agents and they choose the teams that they wanted, not get hold back, had to play longer time for a hometown team. That's what modernization sports do. They give options. That's my final take on this great topic.
Absolutely, and there's definitely, and certainly will be a topic that I think will come up in the future, just because situations always dictate it. But I kind of want to move on to an American topic, another somewhat serious topic. I know I told you we would talk about Bama UGA. I kind of said let's talk about the other one I want to talk about first, just because we're kind of in a serious mood anyway. Okay. So I figure before we lighten it up a bit, I do kind of want to bring up this American diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics. President Biden officially announced it today that no U.S. dignitaries are going to show up in Beijing for the opening ceremony or closing ceremonies of the 2022 Winter Olympics that are going to take place in February in Beijing, China. And obviously, the Chinese are very unhappy with this move. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian, I hope I'm saying that right, about China will take resolute countermeasures, and they're claiming the U.S. is trying to sabotage the games. And a lot of online commentators in China, of course, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because if they say anything positive to the U.S. in the situation, there's going to be consequences for that. There's no such thing as freedom of speech in China. So, obviously, this is not the first time this has happened. Of course, 1980, the U.S. did not show up in Moscow, and the Soviet Union returned the favor by not showing up in Los Angeles. I'll be curious to see what other countries do, because I know we've discussed this before, whether or not Brazil would or wouldn't. I know Bolsonaro is not a big fan of China, so I'll be curious to see if he does a similar thing in this situation. But we're now seeing, I feel like this is another sign that we're ultimately in a Cold War, because if you think about the Cold War, one of the kind of like lesser thought about aspects of it was the sports aspect. You had the USSR versus the USA in that infamous hockey match, the Miracle on Ice. And there was always constantly battles between the Soviet Union and the United States to prove which nation was the better sporting nation. And that was always a massive part of that rivalry, because, just both countries were trying to have this whole idea. We're going to prove communism better, prove capitalism's better. Our way is the best. And sports is one of those direct things where you can compare two countries. And I wonder if we're heading back into a situation where it's going to be all about the USA versus China. Because I think about the last Summer Olympics, where it was about America versus China in terms of gold medals. And, obviously at this, and let me clarify something. Just because there's a diplomatic boycott doesn't mean the athletes are boycotting. The athletes are still going as of now.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that. I guess the U.S. Olympic Committee is still representing U.S.
Yeah. As far as I know, the Olympic Committee is still going to be there. Just you're not going to have the president or anyone else associated with him show up, which to them, which is a sign of disrespect. Because normally you send someone to the games. Like they sent people to Japan. Like I believe Jill Biden went to Japan for the opening ceremonies there. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting move. I personally agree with, because there's a lot of things about China I don't particularly like. I clarify, it's with the government, not the people. Obviously, the government in terms of how they treat the people in Tibet or in Hong Kong or the Uyghurs is a lot of things that the Chinese government does that is reprehensible. And not saying that the American government is perfect. They're far from it. But the Chinese government objectively is just terrible in the stuff that they do. And I actually applaud President Biden for taking this measure. Now, a lot of people wanted him to go further in terms of doing a complete boycott, but I do think that should be the athlete's choice. I mean, personally, I don't know if I would go to these games because it seems like now there's a target on their backs, and I really hope the Chinese are not going to do anything to our
Harmful.
athletes when they go over there, because that's something I am somewhat concerned about. But
And I have another question to you. Do you think if the U.S. made it to the 2018 World Cup in Russia, do you think Trump administration would do anything like that? Not say
oh
like
no,
total
no,
boy.
not with Russia. Nah, because Trump and Putin had a decent relationship, so he would not have. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of a lot of other things with that may or may not have happened beyond the scope of this show. But let's just say Trump and Biden, to me at least, had a decent relationship, and he would have not pulled anything like that. I do think Trump probably would have done the same thing though with China in terms of this move. So, and perhaps more, but clearly U.S. Chinese relations are just not good right now, and for good reason. But we should, and it's so complicated because obviously we need to be careful because I don't want this escalating to a point where we're at a world war or anything, because that's not anything that anyone wants to see. But clearly, there's aspects of the Chinese government that affect us here in the United States that we need to kind of stand up against in a way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that for me is still kind of Brazil's not used to joining sports boycotts officially. I don't even remember. I mean, the last time Brazil was in a war with the country was Paraguay in 1864, and there was no sports competition back then. So, but I imagine how these situations can be used. Like, and the Winter Olympic is not as important in the Summer Olympics. That's my opinion. I think Biden also used this as like a escape. Like, hey, this is relevant to China, but it's not relevant to us. I think I don't know how much Winter Olympic is important in U.S., but I
I
still
mean, it's
think
important to like obviously the more northern regions. I think in the South, ultimately, it's not that big, but you go to more northern areas, places where hockey is a lot bigger, where you can ski, like the Rockies, it's way bigger out there. Because remember, Salt Lake City hosted them back in 2002, so it's huge there.
yeah. Unfortunately, Brazil will never host a Winter Olympics. Unfortunately, I don't think
Yeah, because
Brazil can
you'd
raise.
have to host it in July.
And we're hosting the top of the mountains. We have to create loads of snow, like because the snow that we even create is like so tiny, like it's unimaginable.
I don't
Maybe
think
Argentina.
Brazil's hosting anything for a decade after the fortune they spent on Rio
The
de
world.
Janeiro. Yeah.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, they got the Copa America this year with all the craziness. I mean, you talk about boycott. A lot of there was almost an internal boycott. I don't think you remember back in June, Brazil was awarded the host of the Copa America, because Argentina and Colombia declined because of COVID, and then even the Supreme Court got involved and wanted to shut down because it was a Bolsonaro move, but ended up happening and Argentina won. But Brazil is so crazy that there's internal boycotts.
Yeah, I mean that makes more sense because that's what they care about. So, I mean, it makes sense that if any controversy were to happen, it would be that. I'm trying to think of what scenario would even happen, because obviously, Brazil doesn't have the enemies that America does, or the international problems that Brazil does in terms of having just bases everywhere and just. I mean, America always is going to find itself in spots as long as it acts like the superpower / empire that it is. So it's one of the consequences. We'll see what comes of this. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail. I don't know what countermeasures China's talking about, but we'll definitely see what happens with all that. And hopefully, and I'll say this, in terms of the Winter Olympics, I'm personally don't know about watching them, just because it does feel kind of dirty supporting China right now because of what they've been doing. to various groups within China, not just one group, but a lot of different groups. So we'll have to see what happens with the Chinese. But on to lighter topics. Georgia cannot beat Alabama. They just can't. Well, why can they not? They have not beaten them since 2007, and it looked like that this was their perfect chance, that everything was aligning. But then Alabama shows up to Atlanta, drops 24 points in the second quarter, and runs the Georgia Bulldogs out of the stadium. It's hilarious. Like, they haven't won a national title since 1980, and I really thought that, and obviously they can still win a national title. Like, Bruno, sound like your friend Bruno with the hot taker, Bama and Michigan. And Michigan will be the champions. We're going to get to that here in just a moment on who is going to win the playoffs. But just quickly, I don't know if you got to see the game, but just what are your thoughts on Georgia blowing another chance to win the SEC?
I mean, to be honest, I did not get to watch. I was in a family gathering, but unfortunately, I wasn't surprised because and again, you know, Nick Saban know how to defeat their old assistants,
Right.
and Georgia is still can't find a reliable quarterback,
Right.
which looks like is a viable thing to win in the big game.
Oh, absolutely. Like, Stetson Bennett is a walk-on quarterback, and they've got 5-star quarterbacks on the bench. You've got JT Daniels. You have Carson Beck. Guys who have talent, but they can't get on the field. And I've seen Georgia fans talk about this ad nauseum, and it's the Achilles heel of Georgia. Bruno's saying Spencer Rattler's going to Georgia. He would be stupid to go to Georgia. He should go to any other school but Georgia, because he's not going to get on the field at Georgia, because Kirby Smart's going to play is always going to play the worst quarterback. Like, it's absolutely asinine. What Kirby Smart wants, he wants a game manager who isn't going to turn over the football and take a lot of chances. That's what Kirby Smart wants to quarterback. He's playing college football as if it's still 2010. Because that's also when I make this comment the other day, that watching that game was basically watching modern Alabama, which was Alabama, versus old Alabama, which was Georgia. And there's a reason why Nick Saban has evolved from ground and pound to let's air it out all over the field. Because in 2021, you cannot win with a game managing quarterback. Think about the last 5 college football national championship winning quarterbacks: Mac Jones, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, before that, Deshaun Watson. All NFL quarterbacks, all elite college quarterbacks. You don't see Jake Fromm on that list. You don't see Stetson Bennett on that list. That's what's keeping Georgia back. You can have all the defensive talent in the world that you want. You can have all the receiver talent, the running back talent, the offensive line talent. But if you're still trying out Stetson Bennett or Jake Fromm or someone like that who is a game manager and can't force it down the field, you're not going to win. So that's why Georgia loses to Alabama every single time, because Alabama has a Bryce Young over there. They have a Mac Jones over there, and you don't. So Georgia, Kirby Smart, if they were smart, they would get JT Daniels ready and have him start against Michigan. But just listen to him in his post-game press conference, they're going to roll with Stetson Bennett. And I just think that's going to cost him. They cannot win a national championship with Stetson Bennett at quarterback. They just can't. Because clearly their defense is not as great as I thought they were. But I do think, kind of looking back at it, Alabama is the only offense that was capable. Because I've kind of been saying that if a team can find a way to get a consistent passing attack on them, then that's how you could beat Georgia. And Bama is good enough to where they could do that. So it's unfortunate for my friends who are Georgia fans, but it's Kirby Smart's fault. It is 100% Kirby Smart's fault. And if he cannot figure out a way to choose better quarterbacks, it's going to be his downfall. It will 100% be his downfall, and it will cost him from ever winning a national title when he should win a national title. Like, he is an amazing recruiter, obviously amazing defensive coach, but You can't roll out terrible quarterbacks. I'm sorry, you just cannot roll out terrible quarterbacks and expect to win a national title.
No, yeah, I mean, this new college football world, you can't just, as you said, pound and ground. Like you have to throw the ball. Like Nick Saban, I think back in before like 2015, he wasn't. His quarterbacks were elite, but there's a famous picture of three of his quarterbacks are starters in the NFL: Mac Jones,
Right.
Jalen Hurts, and Tua Tagovailoa, because he understood the value of a good quarterback to the system.
Oh, absolutely. They're churning out great quarterbacks at Alabama. So that's um it is what it is. Of course, Bryce Young's probably gonna be your Heisman winner Saturday. Not that I'm gonna watch because I don't care about the Heisman ceremony, because they screwed over Peyton Manning in 1997. But that's another topic for another day. So just kind of going from there, kind of briefly, the other conference title games. Of course, you had Utah over Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. You had Baylor over Oklahoma State, Pittsburgh over Wake Forest, and Michigan over Iowa in the Big Ten, and Cincinnati over Houston in the American. So your final four, of course, you have number 1 Alabama versus number 4 Cincinnati, and shout out to Cincinnati, the first G5 non-P5 team to make the playoffs. Amazing. Finally, they're getting the opportunity that Boise State didn't get, that Utah didn't get, that TCU or UCF got a chance to play for a national championship. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with this opportunity. And then the other game, number 2 Georgia versus number 2 Michigan versus number 3 Georgia. So Gus, before I go into my thoughts, just what are your thoughts on these two matchups?
First of all, also congratulations to the only undefeated team in the college football playoffs, Cincinnati Bearcats.
Absolutely, the only undefeated team.
The only undefeated team. And now it's going to be an interesting matchup against Alabama because, I remember Colin Cowherd say, oh, if Alabama and Cincinnati play, Alabama will roll out. Maybe. But finally, Cincinnati is getting the shot. And also, the American Athletic Conference, as you said, UCF came close in 2017. But finally, Cincinnati made it. It just shows the strength of the AAC. Because think about it. The AAC got closer to be in a national championship in the last 5 years than the Pac-12.
Right. And it shows how relevant that conference is, at least up until now, because I think Lincoln Riley could bring that conference back with USC. But it's just amazing because it's just, you think about, like, really Boise State opened up the door when they beat Oklahoma. And Boise State had a couple of runs at it, but they never got into the top 2. TCU had some amazing teams with Andy Dalton, never got into the top 2. Utah has some really great teams, so never got a chance. So I really think that this game is for them. It's for those programs and for Cincinnati. It's for all those programs that never got a chance, like the Hawaii in 2008 or Northern Illinois in like 2015. Like teams that went undefeated that never got a shot. And it even goes back further beyond that. A team like 1998 Tulane that went undefeated and never got a shot. Cincinnati now, at the bare minimum, needs to be competitive to prove that other G5 teams deserve that shot. Because it's not just about Cincinnati. It's about all the G5 teams. Because Cincinnati goes out there and competes with Bama, then other G5 teams are going to get their shots at a P5 team. And, I think Cincinnati can compete now. I don't think they're going to win. I think Bama just has too much talent. They'll win. I think Bama wins like 45-24 over Cincy. But I think Cincy's going to keep it close for a while. I think they're going to be competitive. I think they're going to fight. Obviously, they'll fight very, very tough. But Bama just has too much. And Bryce Young will have to have his worst game in a while. They'll have to play like they did against Auburn for Cincy to have a chance. But it's too much, I think, for Cincy to handle. And they've had some struggles this year. But we do have to also remember that Cincy went on the road and beat Notre Dame. So they're no slouch. And I do caution Alabama fans into thinking that this is just a free win, because it isn't. I think Cincinnati's better than Texas A&M, who Bama lost to. So even though Bama's by far playing their best football now, it's definitely not 100% guarantee. And obviously I'll be full on rooting for Cincinnati when that game happens. I wouldn't bet any money on them winning.
And the question is, last year Alabama destroyed Notre Dame. 31-14, the same number one versus number four matchup. If this game is more competitive than that, the argument goes further, I believe.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, I don't know.
Because
Go ahead.
no, because I mean Notre Dame, an elite football talent, guided by Brian Kelly, couldn't compete with Alabama. And Cincinnati can, then he's going to even drive even further the argument that you made.
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, Cincinnati's competitive and wins, I think it'll accelerate the argument for an expanded playoff of at least 8 teams, maybe up to 12, 16, whatever number you want. And I actually do have a hot take on that particular topic a little bit later. But yeah, so then on the other game, what do you think about Michigan and Georgia?
I'm rooting for Michigan. I think Jim Harbaugh really deserved to be there after he was denied in 2016 with that controversial call versus Ohio State. But he finally got the shot by demolishing Iowa, by getting there. And I think it's going to be, kind of look like the Oklahoma Georgia of 2017. I think it's going to be a really competitive game. It's going to be a game for the ages. And
It's not going to be a shootout like that, though. Like I think it's going to be that close, but I think it'll be more in the 20s.
Yeah,
than in the
yeah. It's
upper
gonna be a
40s.
close game, but yeah, no. I'm not saying it's gonna be a shootout, a lot of points. But I'm saying it's gonna be competitive. It's really close.
Yeah, I'm really excited to watch Aiden Hutchinson this game. Aiden Hutchinson might be the best player in college football this year. I mean, he has a Heisman invite. I don't think obviously he's not going to win it because that's a quarterback award, unfortunately, at this point. But I don't know a wide receiver won it last year, but more often than not, it's a quarterback. But Aiden Hutchinson's the MVP for any given team. Because I'll say this, I don't even think Bryce Young's the best player on his team. Will Anderson is the best player in Alabama, and he should also have a Heisman invite. If you look at his stats, that's Heisman deserving, but defensive ends just don't get a lot of love, unfortunately, in this sport, at least when it comes to MVP hires. But Aiden Hutchinson, he's an X factor. And ultimately, just the question is, how much do you trust Stetson Bennett? Because I just don't trust him. Kane McNamara, the quarterback for Michigan, is solid. I don't know how much better than Stetson Bennett he really is, but they throw it downfield with him more than they do with the Georgia does with Stetson Bennett. Hassan Haskins is a really, really good running back. And obviously, Georgia's defense is going to show up motivated after getting exposed in the game against Bama. Ultimately, I just don't see Michigan having enough offense to beat Georgia. But I think it'll be a very close game. I have Georgia winning this like 24-17. I think Michigan will have their chances. But with
I'll go with Bruno. I'll take Michigan 24-17.
Ooh, okay. So I'm the only one here sticking with Georgia, making a rematch of the SEC title game. But I wouldn't be shocked if Michigan won. And Michigan's been playing excellent. Just typically the Big Ten versus SEC recently has favored the SEC because really the only major Big Ten win I can think of in the last decade is Ohio State over Bama in 2014. And really outside of that, the SEC has just dominated the Big Ten. So
I mean, last year Alabama destroyed Ohio State.
Right. And you think about before that, LSU ran through Oklahoma and Clemson. So now one of those teams were in the Big Ten. Before that, I mean, the Big Ten was in the playoffs there for a couple of years. So, as I said, since Ohio State beat Bama in 2014, the Big Ten has not had a really big win over the SEC.
I mean, because I remember Michigan State lost really bad in the semis versus Alabama. And then I remember the Ohio State also being demolished by Alabama too.
Yeah. So Bruno, he thinks Michigan's going to win it all. Now, Michigan versus Bama is interesting because I do think Michigan has the pass rush to get to Bryce Young. And if you look at that Georgia game the other day, one of the big problems for Georgia was they couldn't get to Bryce Young. And Bryce Young, under pressure, can make some bad decisions, can start getting inaccurate. And I think a guy like Aiden Hutchinson could really cause Bryce Young and just to make some mistakes. And so, yeah, I think Michigan would have a shot at beating Bama. My only concern is if Alabama's offense really comes out clicking, can Michigan hang on with Alabama in a shootout? I just have my questions on that. But But Michigan definitely, I think, is built to compete with these two teams. They have the talent, and obviously, Jim Harbaugh is an amazing coach. All the questions whether or not he should be fired over the years were always silly. And I really think that Jim Harbaugh's success this year is proof that you shouldn't fire a coach at the first sign of trouble. Sometimes you gotta let a guy build his program. You gotta give him a couple of years because you can finally have success and finally get over your hump, get over your arch rival, and now you have a chance to play for a national title. So go ahead.
And also, interesting fact, I think it's the first time in a long time that there's not only one but two new teams in the college football playoffs that never been there before.
Yeah, if Bama wins, Nick's gonna be great. I mean, Nick Saban's already the greatest coach ever. That would just further solidify. I mean, it's like Tom Brady in the NFL. Like, more championships just solidifies your title as GOAT. So Nick Saban, to me, is already that. I mean,
isn't he like tie with Bear Bryant?
I think so. Yeah. So championship would just, and really Nick Saban is more impressive than Bear Bryant, just because Bear Bryant was in a much easier area of college football. Like, it just was. Like, it's much harder to win today and to dominate the way he has. I mean, literally, think about how talented the SEC is. And Nick Saban's won 8 out of the last 15 SEC championships. I mean, that's just an unbelievable stat. I mean, he is the king of SEC football, the king of college football. And it's just he's the GOAT. There's really no disputing it at this point. And I personally can't wait as a Tennessee fan until he retires, because I deeply respect him. But I'm ready for Tennessee to have some success against Alabama again. I just don't think that's going to happen with Nick Saban as coach. And Bruno, go ahead.
And he brought a good comparison as well. Like, this Michigan football situation last year was kind of remind me of 2011 Corinthians, where TT was on the hot seat. They were eliminated in the first round of Libertadores, but they kept him and they won the Brazilian Championship, Libertadores Championship. So sometimes keeping a coach when they're really on a hot seat can work.
Yeah, it is silly how it's gone to college football, and I guess it's a good transition to get into what's been going on with coaching hires, because it's been another wild week of the coaching carousel. Of course, Notre Dame just had to promote their defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, to head coach. But probably the craziest situation was Miami, because basically Miami hired a coach before they fired their coach. Their boosters, they don't have an AD right now. They just went out and hired Clemson's athletic director. But while they didn't have an AD, the boosters basically decided to go out and get Mario Cristobal from Oregon to be their new head coach before they fired Manny Diaz. So Manny Diaz kind of got screwed over by the Miami administration, and he was furious about that, wrote an angry letter on Twitter. And I don't even think this is that good of a hire for Miami. Like, Mario Cristobal is a great recruiter, but he's a terrible coach. I mean, literally, he got blown out twice in 3 weeks by Utah, and Utah's not an elite football team. I know they're playing really good football, but they don't have the talent that Oregon does. Like, Mario Cristobal is just not a good coach, period. I know they beat Ohio State, but losing to Stanford, that free-win Stanford team, and then getting blown out twice by the same Utah team. I mean, it's one thing to get blown out once on the road, but then to see them a second time in a neutral site game where you have more fans and get blown out again, that's unacceptable. And I think a lot of Oregon fans are happy to see him go, just because he's wasting their talent. So I just don't think it's going to work out as well as Miami thinks it is, because there's a lot of things with Miami that work against them, because Miami does not have their own stadium. They have to play in the Dolphins Stadium, which, if you're not familiar with Miami, Coral Gables is like an hour away from the Miami Dolphins Stadium. So it's not an on-campus stadium, and results in it being a bad atmosphere. The University of Miami typically is a private university, so a little bit stricter academic standards, but they don't really enforce them. And typically the administration support hasn't been as good there. And historically, outside of their run in the 80s and late 90s, early 2000s, they haven't been that good.
I mean, the Orange Bowl were a big factor as well.
Oh, yeah. Back when the U had the Orange Bowl Stadium, like, that was one of the best atmospheres in college football, when they were running for the smoke, stuff like that. But ever since they moved to Hard Rock Stadium, it isn't the same. Like, the U just doesn't hold the same weight that it used to. Like, this doesn't. Like, this used to mean something. But we'll see if Mario Cristobal can bring it back. I seriously doubt it. I think at most he's an 8 to 9 win coach, and which Miami thinks a lot higher of themselves than that. And Oklahoma went and hired Clemson's DC Brent Venables to replace Lincoln Riley. Interesting hire. I mean, we'll have to see how it works. Brent Venables never been a head coach, so I don't know how that's going to work. It's always a risk. I think for a program like Oklahoma, I would always try to get an HC, but if you're going to go coordinator, I mean, that's about as good as you can go. Venables has experience with Oklahoma. He knows the Southeast, which is going to help you with your transition to the SEC. And he could help fix that defense, which has been terrible for the most part of the decade. So we'll have to see what happens. Just what are your general takes on those hires?
I mean, Mario Cristobal has ties to Miami.
Yeah, he played there and he coached there.
Yeah, so he has ties there. So, of course, when you see a coach that had some success, I mean, Oregon competed throughout the season for a spot in the national championship, went to the Pac-12 championship. So, of course, Miami is going to go for it, and the boosters want somebody exciting because, you know, Miami is a private university, so they need to have more, attract more, and they still hold the legacy of college football because they were relevant, as you said, in the from late 80s to early 2000. But I think, you know, Notre Dame went to the safe choice. I think since they still need to play a big bowl game, you know, they finish top 5, so they went on the, you know, more safe direction, you know, promoting their DC. And the other coaches, I mean, it's still very much in the open, like Brent Venables, and I think LSU, you know, still does not have a head coach. Yeah, I mean,
No, they have Brian Kelly.
Brian Kelly,
Would,
and even Lincoln Riley.
I probably didn't do that justice, but I don't know if did you see that video where like he was sounded like he was faking a southern accent?
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna try to appeal with the fan base.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just saying I wouldn't have left Oregon for Miami personally. I understand having the personal ties, but I don't think Miami's as good of a job as they seem to think it is. They haven't won a single ACC job or ACC championship since they moved there in 2004. And think about how bad the ACC has been in some of those years. Just saying. And
I
they're
think
the third best program in that state.
The closest they came, I think, was 2017, where they were in the top 4 until like the last week. I think they lost to Pitt.
Yeah, they lost to Pitt, and then they got blown out by Clemson. So I just don't think they're as good of a program as they seem to think they are. But then again, this holds something. I understand they used to be good. In a way, they're a lot like Tennessee and Nebraska. Although I think out of those 3 programs, Tennessee's positioned a lot better because you still have a rabid fan base. You have the resources. You just have, unfortunately, all of your rivals are doing exceptionally well at the moment. So that's really difficult to overcome. But I'm really hoping that Josh Heupel is ultimately the guy. We'll have to wait and see in the long run. Just a last question. Oh, go ahead. Oh, what were we going to say?
I say congratulations to the Tennessee football again into the Music City Bowl. The last time they went there, I was in Brazil for vacation too.
Right. Yeah, they played Purdue, the Purdue Boilermakers, which they've only played them once in 1979 and lost to them. So hopefully the Vols will pull this one out. I think they will be an interesting game. A lot of it depends on who Purdue exactly plays because the bowl games are just a crapshoot at this point of who wants to play, who doesn't. And, you know, at this point, I don't blame players. Like, if coaches can ditch teams for other teams, then players can ditch their teams to get ready for the NFL. Like, it's just a fact of modern college football because these bowl games don't mean anything. And it's going to relate back to my hot take at the end in terms of getting a more rewarding postseason. But, you know, I do think the Vols win this thing, but we'll see what happens. But the last thing I kind of want to ask before moving on to the Brazilian topics, who can Oregon get? You know, a lot of rumors about Chip Kelly. I don't know if he's going to leave UCLA for Oregon, but it's an interesting job because, you know, you realize 3 out of the last 4 coaches have ditched Oregon. You know, Chip Kelly went to the Eagles. You know, they had Mike Helfrich who got fired. They had Willie Taggart for a year who ditched them for Florida State, and now you have Mario Cristobal who left them for Miami. So who can Oregon get? Because they really need, with Lincoln Riley now in the USC job, and obviously Bruno's bringing that up. Lincoln Riley is getting paid north of, I believe, $100 million to coach at USC, which is just unbelievable in terms of $110 million, which is just unbelievable. But Oregon's going to have to compete with that, and they have Phil Knight, so they theoretically should have the money to pay someone a high amount. But who can they get to go to Oregon? I mean, that's an interesting job.
That's maybe
because I saw a report earlier that they're talking to potentially Chris
Pete Carroll,
coach at Boise
Pete
State.
Carroll.
Hey, Pete Carroll might be a free man soon because he's probably going to get fired at Seattle. I don't know if he wants to go back to college at this point. I think he's just going to retire. I know Brian Harsin at Auburn might be a candidate. He might want to go back to the Northwest. So there's, I think, some potential candidates. One guy I would think about, Lane Kiffin. I mean, he went to the Pac-12. He was decent. I know USC wasn't impressed with him. But I think a lot we forget, too, that Lane Kiffin was saddled with sanctions because he came back and cleaned up Pete Carroll's mess. And I don't think USC gave him as fair of a shake as they should have. I can't believe I'm even defending that because he ditched my team, the Vols, to go out there. But I do think he perhaps should have given a little bit of a longer leash than he did. But I think those are just some people I think that could go to Oregon. But Chris Pearson would be the most interesting one because he would be elite at Oregon, and make Washington mad because Washington fans absolutely hate Oregon. So, I mean, that would be a very interesting storyline out in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I mean, the Pac-12 and Oregon got to go big because, USC went big and Oregon kind of, along with Utah, dominated the conference. But I think the landscape is going to change. And Chip Kelly, I don't think he's going to leave UCLA. I mean, after all the way he's starting to develop the program, I don't think he should leave because now he's in a point that I think he's going to start getting results. That's what
and really college football needs this. They need the Pac-12 to be good because it is not good for the sport for the Pac-12 because the Pac-12, because think about it, in the Southeast you have the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten's up in the Big West, the Big 12 Spanish in the Midwest, back down through the Southern Plains. The Pac-12 is the only major conference out west. And it's not been good for the entire West Coast to be alienated because why would the West Coast care about college football in the past 5 years? When USC is not good, when Oregon is mediocre, when Washington's not very good, it really hurts college football. Like, they need UCLA to be good. Because Utah doesn't have a massive fan base. Colorado doesn't have a massive fan base. Washington State doesn't have a massive fan base.
They need USC and Oregon.
Yeah, USC and Oregon need to be good for college football because that will make the West Coast relevant again. Because it really just feels like the West Coast, people out there just don't care about it as much. And really, I don't blame them because, you could watch the Rams, the 49ers, the Seahawks. I mean, those teams have
the Giants. The Giants and the Dodgers, did great on the MLB postseason.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, the Sharks have been really good over the years in NHL. Of course, you got the Golden State Warriors and the Lakers, the Trailblazers. I mean, much competition out on the West Coast, especially in the markets of like LA and Seattle and Oregon, that those college teams have not been producing the same results in order to make those teams relevant and to make the sport relevant. Because think about in Tennessee, even as bad as the Vols have been, the college football is still very relevant in this state because we're surrounded by Alabama, surrounded by Georgia, surrounded by Kentucky, and all these other teams that have been really good recently. And in California, the nearest good team to you is like Utah and BYU. And like, why would you care about those teams? So I really do think that I really am hoping that USC and Oregon, those teams can be consistently really good again because we need the Pac-12 to be relevant. And that's partially why we need an expanded playoff. So we have a team from out west in the playoffs. So the West Coast is just not irrelevant because it's already hard enough when the Pac-12 plays all their games late at night and no one really watches them because of that. So hopefully, USC can be good again to help kind of turn that tide. But I know now that you want briefly to go into some Brazilian topics. There's not a lot apparently going on down there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the last regular season week of Brazilian soccer, and the Brazilian Championship come down to the last round. We already have a champion, Atlético Mineiro. They got the trophy on Sunday, celebrate with the fans. Then you have the Libertadores spots, which is the main South American competition, which already has 4 teams in it. Palmeiras, which won the Libertadores, so he got an automatic bid. Atlético Paranaense won the Sul-Americana, the second division tournament in South America, got the automatic bid. Flamengo, the second place. Corinthians fourth and Fortaleza fifth already are in the group stage. There's 4 teams that are still fighting to get into the group stage: Bragantino, Fluminense, América Mineiro, and Atlético Goianiense. To the 2 spots that are on the first round, the pre-playoffs: Bragantino, Fluminense, América Mineiro, Atlético Goianiense, Ceará, Santos, Internacional, and São Paulo are fighting for 2 spots. For Sul-Americana, the second division in the South America, only 1 spot for Cuiabá, Bahia, and Juventude. But all eyes are going to be in the relegation fight. Sport and Chapecoense already got relegated, but 4 teams are still fighting for 2 spots to avoid those 2 spots. I mean, or those 4 teams are fighting for 2 spots to be saved: Cuiabá, Bahia, Juventude, and Grêmio. Grêmio has the toughest mission of all because he has to win his game and root for Bahia and Juventude to lose. Bahia and Cuiabá just have to win their games and they're fine. So it's gonna be on. All games are on Thursday night, 9 p.m. Brazil time, 7 p.m. Uh, America time. So it's gonna be a very interesting fight. For Grêmio, for example, has a 96% chance of being relegated. So they only have 4% chance of staying in the first division. That's kind of high, you know.
That's
Bahia
really hard
has
the feeling amongst their fan base. I know you said earlier that they've been expecting to get relegated from us, but is there still like that modicum of hope, that 4% of modicum of hope that people have, or are they just typically resigned at this
they
point?
they they hold they I think they hold the Mystic as they call an immortal team. That's the Grêmio's nickname is being immortal because Grêmio's fans always say that when you think Grêmio is dead, he come back to life to win a game or to get a trophy. So they're holding into this mystic of, if we still have a chance, we're this immortal team and we can survive. I think it's hard because it depends on other 2 teams losing, not only time, but losing. One of those teams are playing at home. So, and they see throughout the whole tournament, throughout the whole championship in the relegation zone. I mean, miracles can happen if if something like this would have happened to Grêmio, I wouldn't be surprised because they're the team that miracles that happen. I mean, the 2005 Aflitos battle was one of the craziest soccer game of all time. Now Grêmio's in the second division. Then they were playing on the road. They need to tie the game to get promoted. The other team needed to win, and if the other team beat Grêmio, Grêmio would not get to the first division. There was a penalty award to the other team. 4 players of Grêmio were red card. They were kicked out. They were red card. There were penalty against. The goalkeeper saved the penalty. The Grêmio ended up scoring, got promoted, won the second division trophy. So it was one of the craziest stories of soccer of all time. So Grêmio has a lot of mystic, has a lot of tradition, but I think it's hard. I don't think they still have to win their game, even though it's versus Atlético Mineiro, which won the tournament and probably going to play all reserves and all like young players. They still need to win their game. They're focused on the other team, but you still need to win your game in order for you root toward the other teams.
Right. That's always the hardest thing when you have to hope for all this other stuff is to focus on your own business because that's all you can control is your own business. And, as I said earlier, you've put yourself in really bad positions. And
I think now I'm showing for on YouTube and Facebook, and I think you can see that, Nick. That's the situation right now. See the.
Yeah, see, Grêmio's at 18, and yeah, they need to go
No,
like
Grêmio's at 40
Baja.
points. 40 points. See, that's points.
Right. Yeah, so I see
So
Sport and Chapecoense are out already.
they're out already. So those four teams here are battling for two spots to get saved. See, like the 15th and 16th position. So Grêmio needs Juventude to lose, and Bahia to lose, because then they're gonna stay at 43. Grêmio would win, go to 43, but Grêmio have 12 wins versus 10 and 11 wins from Bahia. So in this kind of like the tiebreaker, Grêmio would stay ahead of them, even though they have the same number of points.
Right. Yeah, so that's a lot to need 3 games to go specifically the way you need them to go.
Yeah,
Like really, if you're Juventus or Baja, like you just got to play for. Well, I mean, obviously Juventus is going to have to play for a win. Baja should really just play for a draw.
Yeah.
I would park the bus the entire game.
Yeah, and they play on the road. But even though they need to win, because if Bahia tie their game and Juventude won, then Bahia get relegated.
So who, it's like I'm trying to look. So Baja are they BAH up here? They're playing.
Yeah, the BAH. They're playing Fortaleza on the road.
And what's their situation?
Fortaleza is still technically fighting to. I mean, they are in the Libertadores. I think they're don't play for anything because they're already into the group stage. They're basically done their season. Corinthians and Fortaleza, those are the two teams who are playing Juventude and Bahia, and they're done because they have got into this, the top spot to get into the Libertadores, group stage, and they cannot win the title. They're not going to go down into the pre-Libertadores stage because Fortaleza has 55, Fluminense can only get a 54.
Yeah, and then the other team that was the team at 17. What was that? Juventude. Who are they?
Juventude.
They're playing Corinthians, and they're also not playing for anything.
Yeah, they're not playing for anything. That's why I discussed in the beginning of the show. Like Corinthians and Fortaleza, they don't have any incentive to play hard on this game. They're not fighting for anything. Their season is done. Corinthians got into Libertadores. Fortaleza, they got to Libertadores. Even Atlético Mineiro, they won the title. They had a party last Sunday. They're not gonna put their main players in a game they don't need to win.
Right.
Which that sucks. I mean, that's the debate about this format of a regular season only kind of tournament. It comes down to this, big games decided from teams that don't have anything to lose.
Right. Yeah, it reminds you of a racing format. There's been a long debate in NASCAR over should you have a season-long championship or a playoffs at the end, like a chase to sprint cup or whatever. And it's to avoid situations like this because most of the time in a season-long format, the thing's over before the last week, and you want the championship to go down to the end, but it doesn't always going to go down to the end. Of course, like F1, for example, this year, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton are tied heading into the final Grand Prix, which I believe is in Qatar, if I'm correct. I might not be in Qatar; it's somewhere else. But but it's similar to that in terms of having the season-long format because you don't see that anywhere in American sports. Not even the MLS has this format because there's no such thing as regulation. But it's a tough spot. Maybe the reserve teams can help Grêmio, but it just seems like they're not in a good spot.
Yeah, and that's mainly the biggest fight on the last round of Brazilian championship. I mean, I will say because Sao Paulo and Santos, my two biggest rival, won yesterday and saved themselves from relegation. And Flamengo among them were the only teams in Brazilian history never relegated. Never. They always played in the first division since this kind of division kind of stage were created in 1971. So those are the teams, the unrelegatables, they call themselves, the group of three. And Santos and Sao Paulo came close, but they were able to win 2 out of the last 3 games. And
so, my question for you is: so when Grêmio gets relegated, so what are going to be the consequences? I know they're going to drop down a division. They're going to lose a lot of money. So just what will be the long-term effects on the club?
I mean, first of all, they're definitely going to lose a lot of revenue money from TV because back a few years ago, teams that were relegated from the first division to the second division, they still got to keep their TV revenue intact from the first year because a lot of those times, oh, it was an accident, they're gonna go back. But TV now doesn't care. Grêmio, if they got relegated, they're gonna lose a lot of money from TV revenue. A lot of Grêmio has a lot of high profile players. You know, in the beginning of the season, everybody thought Grêmio was gonna be fighting for the title. So Grêmio has Douglas Costa, who were big in Europe, Rafinha, who was in Europe as well, Diego Souza, very experienced player. Their defenders were very successful throughout this last 5 years, where Grêmio was very successful, Kahneman and Jeromel. And I don't know what's going to happen to the roster. Of course, it's going to be a lot of different. And in recent years, a lot of big teams, the Power 12, the teams that have a lot of media, you know, like they're struggling in the second division. It's not been an easy second division. Like, this year we had Cruzeiro, Vasco, and Botafogo, three big teams with millions of fans. The Power 12, only Botafogo were promoted. Cruzeiro, four-time Brazilian champions, and Vasco, four-time Brazilian champions, stayed in the first division again. So getting relegated right now is way harder than it used to. Back in like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if a Power 12 team relegated, they would, like always come back and stronger. And the fans would be like, oh, it was an accident. We're back. But now the tables have turned. I think, Grêmio is relegated. I probably would think they're going to go back. Next year, they're going to win the second division, go back in 2023. But it's not going to be as easy as like even the first time Grêmio went to the second division, 2005 wasn't easy. I mean, they had to literally won a big game, a battle to go back. So,
yeah, I mean, it seems like too that like if you're not able to get back immediately within a year or two, that could create irreversible damage to your fan base, to your club. So the pressure is really going to be on to get back to the Division One.
Yeah, like Cruzeiro right now. Cruzeiro had 4 years. They won 2 Brazilian national championships and 2 Brazilian cups. And then the year after, they had financial troubles and then got relegated. They stayed in the first division. Again, they're going to play the second division for the third time in a row. So you don't want a situation like that. I don't think Grêmio is going to go all that. But, of course, the second division is very tough right now. Teams are very much, better than it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. I covered the second division with Guarani and Ponte Preta, the teams from Metro Campinas here. And it's a very physical division. It's a very, players, they don't have much talent. So they play fast, they play strong, they're very a lot of contact. And, and Grêmio definitely, they were successful in the past 4 years. They won Libertadores, they won Brazilian Cup, they were runner-ups in the Libertadores, in the Brazilian Cup last year. They won the semifinals of the Libertadores in 2017, 2018, 2019. So a lot of people, of course, it came out of nowhere. Sometimes you have a bad season. Sometimes your roster doesn't click. The roster doesn't click. There's no chemistry between the players. But they still have a chance to hold on. And I bet a lot of Grêmio fans will be watching not only one, but 3 TVs.
Oh yeah, that's gotta be the most. It's gonna be a stressful 2 hours for them.
Yeah, and real quick, the Brazilian soccer coaching carousel. Flamengo still does not have a coach yet after they fired Renato Gaúcho. They're waiting on Jorge Jesus, current Benfica head coach, who also was very, very successful. Flamengo won it all, won Brazilian national championship, won Libertadores, won the state tournament. He was very loved by the fans, but he still is under contract with Benfica. Benfica has a big game against Barcelona on Wednesday. And if they advance to the knockout stage of the Champions League, I don't think he's going to leave, even though the Benfica fans does not like Jorge Jesus. The Benfica president, is not a big fan of him. So we'll see what Flamengo is going to do. I think it's a big mistake for Jorge Jesus to come back because, he was so successful at Flamengo. I don't think he's going to ever repeat what he did. And again, big expectations leads to big disappointments. And Corinthians is still on. Fans are still not happy with Silvinho, and arguing that he maybe is not the best coach to coach this big star team. And current São Paulo head coach Rogério Ceni, who used to be a big player, big goalkeeper, like play forever. He was able to save São Paulo from relegation, but in his press conference, he was very avoiding questions about next year. He said he will still think about it, what he's going to do. And, I always thought he was going to stay to create a roster of his own and try to stay in Sao Paulo because that's the team he loves. That's the team the fans adore him. He played there for like 2 decades. He scored more than 100 goals as a keeper there. But again, he might want to move because he feels the environment in Sao Paulo right now is not as good. And I'm going to get that into my hot takes as well.
Yeah, and you never want to stay in a terrible environment like that. I'm kind of curious as we move into the hot take exactly what you mean by Sao Paulo being in a bad environment.
Yeah, and I'm gonna save to my hot take, and I'm sorry, I know you want to finish early, but it's so many topics. But let's move on to hot takes.
Oh, absolutely. So I kind of want to start with you, just kind of like since you left off of Sao Paulo.
Okay, sounds good.
Transition into that.
So even though I hate, I'm not a big fan of São Paulo. They're my rivals. When I was a kid, they used to destroy Corinthians all the time. It's still sad to see how São Paulo still live in the past. They celebrated not being relegated. 10 years ago, this would be unthinkable. São Paulo, last decade, they won 3 consecutive Brazilian national championships. They won the South American Championship 2005. They won the FIFA World Cup tournament. The gold standard of soccer. They were the high standard of soccer in Brazil between like 2004 and 2009. And then something along the way, they lost that gold standard. A lot of political turmoil, a lot of queues, and a lot of political battles within the club, and mismanagement. A lot coach firing and hiring. A lot of coaches bad decisions, and and now São Paulo is literally celebrating not being relegated. São Paulo fans deserve better than that. São Paulo is hiring figures from the past, like, for example, the current athletic director from São Paulo is Muricy Ramalho, which he won the 3 consecutive Brazilian championships between 2006 and 2008. It's like, kind of compare when Philip Fulmer came back to the Vols.
Right.
Everybody thought it was a good hire, but at the end, Muricy Ramalho, as great personality as he has, his knowledge of soccer as he has, he's been not able to be the AD that São Paulo needs. São Paulo also tried to hire for their front office Rai, which was an idol in the 90s, is like the quarterback, the beautiful quarterback for São Paulo. It didn't work out. He wasn't up to the task. But São Paulo needs to move on from this glorious past and try to find a path to the future, because year by year, São Paulo's keeping the past. Of course, a lot of fans are still, hiding, celebrating the fact São Paulo never got relegated. They won the state championship this year after staying 9 years without any title. For a team in the 2000s and 2010 won at all, like all the tournaments they can win, they stay a decade without any titles. So, I mean, that's really and sad to say, I don't think it's going to change in moving forward. Bringing old idols back, thinking they're going to get different results, is not cutting São Paulo anymore.
Yeah, sounds like a lot like Miami and the points I was making about them earlier. Just you have to cut ties with the past sometimes and move into a new direction. And this is transition seamlessly into my hot take. Obviously, the FBS, the Football Bowl Division 1. Bowl games have always been a big part of college football in terms of rewards. But it's time to transition completely to a playoff, and not just the 14 playoff, not just an 8 or a 12 or even a 16. The FCS, which is kind of basically not necessarily D2, but they're Division 1 AA.
Here in Brazil would be the A2. I know how to compare. It would be the A2.
Yes. So at FCS level, they don't have bowl games. Instead, they have a 24-team playoff that goes through 5 rounds. I think FBS should copy them. There's a lot of really interesting games that happen because of this in FCS. For example, East Tennessee State University, They played Kennesaw State the other day. They were down 31-17 with 2 minutes left, and they managed to come back and win the football game. One of the most incredible comebacks I've ever seen. They score a touchdown with a minute and a half left, cut to 31-24. They get the onside kick, and then drive it down, score, and then go for 2 and win. Just an insane turnaround for ETSU to win that football game. And I just think about all the games that we're potentially missing out on. What legendary matchups should have happened that didn't? Because we're beholden to this whole bowl game madness. I mean, you think about it, players don't want to play in bowl games anymore. They would rather sit out of them and go to bowl games. Fans don't like going to them. A lot of these bowl games don't have full stands. TV ratings are plummeting for these bowl games outside of the playoffs because everything now is playoffs or bust. Like, how many Ohio State fans are really excited about going to the Rose Bowl? The Rose Bowl. I mean, the Rose Bowl is the granddaddy of them all. But a lot of them are like, I don't really care about playing Utah. It is time for a full-blown playoff system. I may make a video about this someday about my proposal for a 2014 system, how it would work. But I think every conference champion should have a chance at a national title. And I'm tired of bowl games running college football because it ruins the postseason. And the tie-ins create just terrible matchups, and it's just uninteresting. And I would like a more interesting into the football season because our regular season is too great to sacrifice the postseason because the end always, because you think about college football always leaves with a whimper. The NFL ends with a bang, the Super Bowl, and just a grandiose, but the national championship, people forget about it very quickly. Like, you can tell me what happened in the Bucks and Chiefs last year, but how many people can tell you what actually happened in Alabama, Ohio State? Probably not that many. So college football needs a revamp, and a new playoff system is the opportunity to do this revamp.
Can I just add something real quick?
Yeah.
And I still think, my proposal just add to you is just make those bowl games into playoffs. That's so simple. You don't have to sacrifice one to the other.
Honestly, I would rather want on-campus games because that's what FCS does. I think I would love to see a playoff game at Neyland. I would love to see a playoff game at Michigan Stadium.
I know that's the Nirvana scenario. I'm just still trying to bring your scenario into the money interest that bowl games are.
But I mean, the teams in theory could say, screw the bowl games. We're going to do this on our own. And I think it would be just as big, if not bigger, than March Madness. Like, what I'm proposing would be March Madness in December. And it would be way bigger than any bowl game could ever dream of doing. But you're right, though, that those bowl interests probably would somehow get in the way of it.
Because, the NCAA does not want to get involved with college football. Their interest in college basketball is clearly, you see way more branding about NCAA in basketball than in football. So NCAA doesn't want to get into the middle of so many bowl sponsorships and interests to create a more interesting product when they already have an interesting product come in March.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I just don't understand why we can't get this solved in college football. I mean, it took us this long to finally get a G5 team a chance at a national title. I think that there's a lot of teams that should be playing for a postseason tournament that just aren't right now because of the system. And I don't want to hear the arguments of there's maybe two teams that can win a national title. I don't care. I mean, how many teams realistically in March Madness can win a national title? 5, 10? Doesn't change the fact that the first and second rounds of the March Madness are some of the most exciting sporting events you see all year. If we had a 5-team playoff, a 4-team playoff in basketball, we would have never seen UMBC beat Virginia, or Loyola Chicago make a run to the Final Four, or George Mason make a run to the Final Four. There are stories in college football that could happen that are not allowed to happen right now. And that's what I want to see. So the one thing I want to see happen in my lifetime when it comes to college football is an expanded, complex playoff system that gives us a true postseason, an exciting postseason, and the March Madness version of college football, which would be bigger than the March Madness of college basketball. And it honestly would even rival the NFL playoffs. It would be huge. There are billions of dollars that are being wasted. These bowl games could probably go for a couple of million in terms of their TV contracts, maybe a couple of tens or hundreds of millions or whatever. I mean, these contracts would be billions. Like, just think about it. Like, how big a March Madness in December tournament would be, basically.
Even the NFL would, be kind of scared because
Yeah, I
all
mean,
the
it would be mad.
spotlight would be stolen.
Yeah, I mean, it would be insane. So that's what I want, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen. But that's episode 7 of Two Countries, Two Americas, All Sports. For Gustavo Tomazeli down in Americana, Sao Paulo, Brazil, I am Nicholas Hill in Chattanooga, Tennessee, United States. Thank you for watching and take care.